So, what happens when the world's leading academic body on genocide studies puts out a resolution on Gaza and is immediately accused of creating political propaganda? Today, we're breaking down that exact situation, the resolution, and the serious critique it's faced.
All right, so first things first, let's be super clear about who we're talking about here. The International Association of Genocide Scholars, or IAGS, isn't just some random group. We're talking about an organization founded back in '94 that is pretty much considered the leading academic authority on the subject. So yeah, when these guys speak up, people are supposed to listen.
But this resolution? It was hit with some incredibly sharp criticism. One analyst even called it a charade in academic garb. And that's really the heart of what we're digging into today. How did a statement from such a respected group get accused of being more of a political document than a scholarly one?
Okay, so the first big critique is all about the story the resolution is trying to tell. Let's look at how the conflict gets framed, and maybe even more importantly, what the critics are saying got left on the cutting room floor.
So, right here, you can see the core of this whole framing issue. On one side, the resolution really zeroes in on Israeli actions, framing them as targeting the whole Gazan population. But then you look at the other side, and critics are screaming about what's missing. They argue the resolution completely sidesteps Israel's stated military goal of targeting Hamas, and it barely touches the allegations of Hamas using human shields. By leaving out that kind of context, the argument goes, you're left with a very one-sided story.
And that framing, critics argue, isn't just pulled out of thin air. They say it's built on some very specific data choices. So let's do a little detective work and follow that data trail.
Now, the resolution pulls from some big names, right? We're talking major human rights organizations, UN bodies. The critique here isn't that these are, bad sources. Not at all. The issue, according to the analysis, is that the resolution only uses these sources without bringing in any dissenting scholarly opinions or other credible sources that might offer a different take. And this naturally leads us to one of the thorniest issues in any conflict analysis, the casualties. I mean, it seems like a simple question, right? Who is being counted? But the answer, well, it's anything but simple. And this table really lays out the problem pretty starkly. The resolution uses numbers from the Hamas-controlled Gaza Health Ministry, which, as you can see, doesn't separate civilians from combatants. It's just one big number. But then you look at independent analyses, and they suggest that while the total might be in the same ballpark, a huge chunk of that number, maybe as many as 20,000, could be Hamas fighters. By just using that one big, undifferentiated number, the argument is that the resolution paints a really misleading picture of what's happening on the ground.
All right, so from data, we move to our third major point of critique, and this one is all about the words themselves. Because in international law, words have super precise meanings, and the accusation here is that the resolution plays a little fast and loose with some key legal terms.
Okay, this is so important to get right. The resolution makes a big deal of the International Court of Justice finding it plausible that Israel is committing genocide. Now, to you or me, plausible sounds like, yeah, it's probably happening. But in the legal world, it's a way lower bar. It's just a preliminary step that means there's enough of a case to even have a full hearing. It is not in any way a verdict or a finding of guilt. And that's a huge nuance that critics say the resolution just steams right over. And you see a similar thing happening with the ICC warrants for Israeli leaders. The resolution brings them up, but look closely at what the actual charges are. They're for things like starvation and attacks on civilians, which fall under war crimes and crimes against humanity. The charges are serious, no doubt. But what's the one word you don't see on that list? Genocide. Critics say that by bringing up these warrants without being crystal clear about the specific charges, the resolution creates this false link, this implication of genocide, where one hasn't actually been made by the court. And look, this all boils down to one fundamental principle. Genocide isn't just some powerful, emotional word you can throw around. It is a specific legal crime with an incredibly high bar for proof, especially when it comes to intent. An accusation is just that, an accusation. It is not a conviction. And in the eyes of the law, nothing is legally genocide until a court says it is. Okay, so for our final point, we're going to pull back the curtain and look inside the organization itself, because it turns out the whole process of how this resolution got passed is also under some pretty intense scrutiny. And this might be one of the most surprising parts of the whole critique. Take a look at the vote. A whopping 72% of the members of the IAGS just didn't vote. At all.
With only 28% of the members even participating, that immediately makes you ask, right? How much does this resolution really speak for the entire organization? But here's the twist. For that small slice of people who did vote, the support was huge, 86%. So you end up with this really strange situation, a resolution that passed by a landslide, but only among a tiny fraction of the total membership. And that's the real crux of the procedural problem.
And this wasn't just people on the outside pointing fingers. The criticism came from inside the House, too. Some members, like the scholar Sarah Brown, claimed the resolution was pushed through without the proper debate or the kind of town halls they usually have, basically saying the normal rules of debate and transparency were just tossed aside.
So let's tie all these threads together. The critique that we've just walked through really stands on four main legs: a one-sided story that leaves out key context, a reliance on contested data, a misrepresentation of legal terms, and a voting process that, well, raises a lot of questions.
And all of this really leaves us wrestling with a much bigger question, one that goes way beyond just this one conflict or this one resolution. Where do you draw the line between objective academic scholarship and passionate political advocacy? And maybe more importantly, what happens to trust and credibility when that line starts to get blurry?